You're listening to The Art of Imperfect Adulting. I'm your host, Amy Stone. Here, I share stories from real people navigating the adventure that I call adulting. Are you ready? Me too. Let's do this. Well, hello, friends. My guest today is Andy Vargo. Andy, are you ready for a fun chat today?
I am super excited for a fun chat today.
Yay, I am too. All right, I always start my conversations with the same first question. What part of the world do you call home? And then there's a follow-up, which is what's something you love about where you live?
Well, I call Tacoma, Washington home. It's right here in the Pacific Northwest. And I am the ideal person to ask about it because I have lived here my whole life and I absolutely just love Tacoma. Over everything, though, it's really the community that's here. You could go out to any part of town and people will say hi. And whether you're in a bar or a coffee shop, meet strangers that are no longer strangers. And I just love that.
I love that too. I have been to Tacoma in my adventures in the Pacific Northwest. I think you guys have a pretty fantastic record store in Tacoma, like a vintage record store.
Hmm.
And
Is it
I
high
even bought a hat.
voltage?
Yes, that is what it is. High voltage. High
I was
voltage.
like, I hate to call out the wrong record store, but that's a
No,
pretty
no.
popular one. Yeah.
That is the one. That is the one I found. So I have a trucker hat. I was so enamored with that when I went in. I was like, I don't need a record on my trip, but I will support this independent record store. So I love that. All right, I love that. Very, very cool. Next, get to know you question. The way I ask people's age without asking them their age. What generation descriptor matches you? Are you silent generation, baby boomer, Gen X, millennial, or Gen Z?
I am Gen X.
Me too. Me too. It's
The best
great.
generation.
I mean, not to be like
Not
too
to,
like overly
right.
proud of ourselves, but yeah, for
Right.
sure, right? Okay, so very, very good. So today we're going to talk about identity, personal identity, and the reason we're going to talk about this is because you shared with me, and this is the first time we've actually talked. So I don't know you like a long time, but you shared with me that when you were 40, which is a big milestone age for all of us all the time, you made a change in your life. You came out of the closet. Now, I don't know if there's anybody on the interwebs who doesn't know what we mean when we say came out these days, but for people who might be under a rock, this is when we tell the world about our sexual preferences, right? That's what we
Hmm.
do. All right, very good. So, one of the reasons that I think this might have been a big deal change for you is because at the time, I think that you had a spouse and a family. Is that right?
Correct. Yes, I've been married for 20 years, three kids. Yeah.
Very good. Three kids. How old were the kids when you were 40 then?
They were all teenagers from 14 to 19. So it was, kind of looking back, I was like, man, if I could plan when to make things work well for raising kids, that might not have been the best time to have that realization. However, this is imperfect adulting, right? And that was definitely imperfect timing, but it's when things had to change.
So, yeah, I mean, and one of the reasons like I use the word imperfect and I say to people, I'm like, it's a starting point, right? It's like releasing that idea that you're ever going to hit that perfect timing for so many of these
Right.
things, right? So, all right, I'm going to ask you a couple of I'm going to use your word, which is awkward. I'm going to use just some basic and old fashioned and honestly slightly intrusive questions. So if I go too far, let me know. But I want to set the scene for people. There's lots of people who've heard these stories. And, in 2026, we have a different relationship with, the public awareness of LGBTQ scenarios, I feel like than in my childhood when I was young. You made this change in your life at age 40. But my question then is this when you discovered this for yourself about your sexuality, or is this something you had known about yourself and had obscured from the people around you?
Yeah, that's such a great question. It's one that it's one of the first things people wonder. They think,
Right.
well,
People
how did
want to
how did you
know.
not know? Did you just wake up one day and go, "Oh, I think this is how things are." And I knew from the earliest of ages that I was attracted to guys. I didn't necessarily put that label on it. I remember even after I came out having a hard time saying I'm gay because I would still say, well, I'm attracted to guys because I didn't see that as part of my identification. I was like, no, I'm not that. Like, I'm not, and it's not to put anybody who identifies that way down. I just couldn't relate to it in the early parts of my life. And I also, growing up in a very Catholic family in the 80s and 90s, I didn't see living that lifestyle as an option. And not even that I was yearning to live that life. It was more like, well, that's not how you're supposed to live. And I, met someone in high school that I felt like I was in love with and felt like life is working and this is the way things are supposed to be. And maybe these are feelings everyone has, and that, that'll just go away as I age. And I'm happy enough in this life. And so it wasn't so much discovering it at 40, but really discovering that it's not going to change and that I can't be my best self, can't be the best father if I can't be honest with my kids. I can't be a good husband if my spouse doesn't even know me fully. I can't show
Okay.
up anywhere in life completely if I'm not honest with myself first.
Well, yeah, and we're going to get more into that because that is the deeper layer of this conversation. So, not everybody in the audience is going to have this kind of transformation where you've had. But the idea of like reconciling like your inner identity with the identity that you show to the world, this is something that everybody grapples with. It's something that
Hmm.
when you go back to the Psych 101, coursework, it's like that was like, I think Carl Jung and Rogers, they're both like talking about like our sense of self and what we show to other people and all of those things. So you mentioned that you grew up in a faith based family, a Catholic family.
Hmm.
And so was part of this that even though you felt a physical attraction to men, that you did not have in your early years any exposure to men who were romantically involved? Like it just was not something you had seen or had any awareness of?
No, not as a healthy situation.
Okay.
There would be, in culture you'd see kind of jokes or, what we would call now the meme, where it's like, oh, they're a little different, or I
Yeah.
think they're hanging out together. So there would be, and it's not that I didn't grow up in a hateful home where I heard a lot of, I never heard slurs or anything like that, but more so in culture just around me, where you would kind of hear like, oh yeah, I bet those guys are hanging out. I don't even remember some of the words, but uh, awareness that there were gay people in the world. It's not that I didn't know that that wasn't a thing, but it was also, I remember being in middle school and or I was younger than middle school, but I remember at one point, asking my mom, there was some reference to Mary being a virgin, the Virgin Mary. And I remember asking my mom, well, what does that mean to be a virgin? And I was young enough that my mom said, well, that means she's never been with a man. Well,
Mm.
then when I get to middle school and someone says, "Are you a virgin?" And I'm like, "Well, of course I am." Like my thought was, I've never been with a man because that's the way I interpreted that terminology, but I knew that that was not acceptable in society. So yeah, but to get to your question, yeah, it's not that I wasn't aware there were gay people around, but there was no example of
No example,
gay
and it
love.
sounds like when you're thinking back to your perception, it was a negative stereotype. Like this is not the
Definitely.
way we have. This is not the way. This is not the good route to follow.
Hmm.
So it was
Right.
discouraged. All right. So then, so did you marry your high school sweetheart then? You met the
I
person you
did,
married in high
yeah.
school. All right.
Yeah, I got married. I was 21 when I got married, and yeah, we'd been together for a few years before that.
And you never talked to her about the fact that you were attracted to men until you were
No,
40.
no, I was that was my biggest fear was being found out that those were feelings that I had. It
Did
was
you can I
this.
ask you, did you act on these while you like before you came out? Did you explore these or because you were so young when you met the person you
No, I
married?
didn't, and it was more like when it was time to move on. Um, it was more about needing to move on because of all the other unhealthy dynamics in my life. And this
Okay.
was kind of at the crux of them because,
Tell me
yeah,
more. Say more. So like that does that mean that because you were spending so much time masking and covering up and behaving in a way that wasn't natural, you developed some things that were other unhealthy things?
definitely. And really, it wasn't like I never ran into like addiction issues and things like that. That like when we think about like unhealthy side things that can happen. But I found myself continually putting myself in relationships where I was kind of the doormat. I wouldn't stand up for myself, and I when I started to look the years leading up to when I made changes, I started paying better attention to the dynamics in the relationships in my life, but in a way where I started to ask myself, what's the common denominator here? Why do I always end up working for a boss that is dominating and, saying things inappropriate or yelling, and I have a relationship with my spouse that is not healthy, it's toxic. And at some point I have to say, well, how much have I taught people to treat me that way? Or how much have I either subconsciously sought out that dynamic or allowed it? And it's not to say that those people are off the hook for their behavior. However, I allowed the behavior to continue because I wasn't comfortable in my own skin. And I always had that fear of, well, if I stand up for myself, then what am I left with? Or I'd have the thought in the back of my head of, well, yeah, but I'm really am wrong because I'm not being honest here. So they're not completely off that I'm shady or can't be trusted, which is the dynamic I put on in my own head. It wasn't the correct label to say that because I'm not comfortable in my skin that it's shady. But when people don't know what we're struggling with or what we're hiding, all they feel is there's something shady going on or you have an ulterior motive. And because
Yeah.
they know they can't trust you because you're hiding something. And that's my whole conversation now with people is us hiding who we are creates distrust. And if we can just be like, you know what, I feel self-conscious right now because I spilled mustard on my shirt. And so I'm trying to kind of hide myself. Now at least you know why I might be pulling back and it's out on the table and we can move forward.
Yeah, we're going to talk more about that in a second because I think that I don't think there's anybody who makes it through a long life without grappling with that at different phases. It's like, oh my gosh, if people look at me and they see me, they're going to see me. Oh my gosh, what if they
Right.
actually
Yeah,
see me?
and I'm a big proponent of the fact like my thing was that I was in the closet and that was what was hard for me to come to terms with. I'm not trying to say my struggle was so much worse and so much harder because that was the thing I was dealing with. We all have something, and that's I I, I really believe we don't know what everybody's thing is that feels a little bit different, but we all have something.
All right, so very good. So to change tactics, to change topics tiny bit or angles a tiny bit. I think that you and I are close in age, like within a decade probably of each other. And so growing up in the 80s, right? The public
Hmm.
image of LGBTQ individuals and couples and in media and mainstream stuff, it's more public and aware today than it was then. Like there's examples
Right.
in all kind of magazines and so on. So anyway, this is an opinion. Like I'm not setting you up to be an expert on this, but do you think that younger humans today, so like people who are in middle school today, even if they're in a faith-based family or a small town, do you think that they have a different experience dealing with this sort of teen identity exploration be at different pressures, good, bad, and all the others, because there's a lot more public representation?
I would say that's a fair statement. I remember even before I came out, one of my sons was talking about a friend that was in their friends group, and this was when they were, probably 14 or 15 years old at the time. And he said, "Yeah, he doesn't know if he's gay yet. He's still trying to figure it out." And he was saying it just as a no big deal. I don't even know why it came up, but I thought, how cool. I wish that was the sentiment when I was that age, where it was like, oh yeah, we don't know if Andy's figuring himself out yet or not, but we're here when he does, and it doesn't matter which way he goes. That was not, and maybe my friends that I was around might have felt that way, but I didn't dare risk asking. And so I think that the openness around the conversation is a lot healthier in that way. I think that also really, well, as a whole, it's better. There's still places where it depends on the very few people you're surrounded by in your inner circle.
Oh, I think that's a really good point of context. Like, it doesn't matter quite as much what's happening on Instagram, TikTok, or a broadcast media channel. It also matters what's happening in your very private universe, your very
Right.
immediate
Yeah.
universe, not necessarily private, but your very immediate social. That's a very important
Hmm.
thing. All right. So if your life were a Hollywood movie, then when you came out at 40, rainbows and unicorns would have showered from the sky and things would have been all immediately blissful. But I don't think, based on the little I know of your story, I don't think that's exactly how it turns out. I think that you mentioned that you lost the job and there were some other challenges. So, was the job loss related to making this announcement? Like, let's talk about some of these challenges.
Well, it wasn't said that way, but it was 3 weeks after I came out, and I was let go for not being able to keep up with an area, a territory,
Okay.
and had been not given help when I had asked for it. And then later, the three people were hired to replace the work I was doing. So just reading between the lines, I think, yeah, maybe there was something there. Um, I try not to get caught up in assuming other people's motives. Although looking back, I think, yeah, that timing is a little bit suspicious. So,
There's no
and
no
and I
no
did
benefit to,
actually
like,
talk to.
like, to making yourself feel bad, like, the impact is the impact even yeah. Yeah.
Right. And realistically, I know I wasn't keeping up. Well, I was in the middle of a divorce. I know that there were things where I was not struggling with. And at that time in my life, who I was then, I was not the best at saying, this is not sustainable. This is not fair. We need to fix this. I would not have voiced it as well as I would now. And so I can see where I didn't do myself any favors in kind of raising the hand and saying this needs to be fixed. However, it seems like that was kind of obvious, uh but also looking back is like I remember losing that job and thinking, I don't know if I even want that job. It's like I'm ready to move on. And it was kind of the last casualty of other changes I was making in life. And and I remember after, like when you mentioned the rainbow bows and unicorns popping out of the sky and balloons everywhere. And I remember getting several months after into life changes, being out renting a room, being very alone, not living with your kids, and just sitting in this space of going, what was all this for? What was the point of making all these major changes just over like who you want to have sex with? Like, why is that? Like, that seems like so unimportant compared to all of the things that were rocked in my life. Now, when we make big changes, there's the hills and valleys, and we get to the valleys before we start to get up to the summit where we start to see the view change. And I just remember sitting in that space thinking, I don't know if this was worth it, and really struggling with the fact that this was supposed to be a good change and it didn't feel like it. But that's because everything had been stripped away that was my regular support system, my financial support, everything had been was gone, and yet I hadn't started to refill the cup yet. So until I was able to take other action that then rebuilt myself, like I didn't understand that as part of the process. I was like, man, I thought there were gonna be rainbows and unicorns, and I'm just sitting here alone in my room, crying
Yep.
my eyes out. Like, what is this?
One of the So Martha Beck, who is a life coach, she describes that sensation as the empty elevator. Like you're making change in your life. And so you get on the elevator of personal change. It's not, this metaphor is not perfect in my opinion, but it's
Mhm.
like, but the empty elevator sensation, is I think one that we've all felt like it's like no one is in there with me. Like you're in with a lot of people and then all of a sudden it's empty. And just like what you're saying, it's like, cause you haven't refilled it. You
Right.
haven't done those things.
Yeah.
So yeah. So then a was it a surprise? So there's some pretty major changes. This ends your marriage and it changes your living situation. And so was this a very big surprise and a really tough thing for your wife and your children for a long time, a short time, never at all? Like, how was this met within your personal support group and family? Because it sounds like your family is very important to you.
Yeah, it was definitely a long adjustment, and I think there are different. The thing that I found interesting is that it was definitely a surprise to my ex-wife. That's her new preferred pronoun, by the way. Uh, but we, I found that the initial part was okay. Now things make sense, and this is why we were not always lined up. And so then there was actually a time where things made more sense, and we got along okay. And then a little bit afterwards, when I started to unpack and realize the dynamics of things that were not healthy in our relationship and stand up for myself in different ways, then that kind of shifted the dynamic of conversations because it wasn't so much, oh, you're gay and that's a problem. It's, oh, I can't treat you the same way because you don't accept it or allow it in your life. Now we don't have that same relationship. So
So then
that was almost
initially,
a
did you
different
just come
shift.
to your wife with this is the thing about me that's going on, and were you not sure how it would impact the family? Was there a piece of you that thought, well, maybe I can just be more me and the family will stay the way it is?
Well, to be really frank, it was the relationship was pretty bad for years, and
Okay.
we've been talking about divorce. And I knew that it was not, I did not feel good in the relationship myself. And there were things that I didn't stand up for myself about. And I remember this, and this is, I felt like a chicken way to do it because honestly, people are like, that's so brave that you came out. And I'm like, no, it was actually easier to say I'm gay than to say this is an unhealthy dynamic and you don't treat me well and I deserve better. Like that took too much guts. Like to me, this was the chicken way out. Like I to just be like, well, this is something you can't argue with. I know that's just the wrong answer, but it is very much it was the right answer in the long term once I came to terms with everything. However, there was just a point where we had had a really bad weekend and she was blowing me off and we were on a walk and just driving home from this walk, having a very non-emotional conversation about divorce. It was very much, well, what if we do this? What if we do that? It wasn't a fight. It was, how do we make this work for our kids so that we can not be fighting all the time and move on? And then 4 weeks later, we had a really good weekend. And I just remember at the end of the weekend, she's looking at me like, oh, this is great. Things are going to work. And I was like, I thought I had a way out. I thought we were done. I thought we were moving on. And so I just remember saying, if we're going to try to make this work, you need to know this about me. And again, because I didn't have the guts to say, I want to move on. I'm not happy in this situation because I was too chicken that I put it on someone else to say, well, if we want to make this work, you've got to know this, take it or leave it. Like that's not the right way uh, to stand up for yourself in a relationship or to declare what you want. I'm fully aware of that now. This is after a decade of work, by the way. Like I can have these conversations now with the reflection of, yeah, I wouldn't handle that the same way today, but I can also acknowledge that that's the tools that I had to work with and where I was in the time.
Did it, when you made the announcement and you said, listen, if we're going to have any more of these conversations, there's something you need to know about me. This is how I'm actually attracted to men. Was that an instant grenade in the marriage where you were very quickly looking for a new place to live and doing the details, or was it like a we'll talk about it tomorrow kind of
It was
conversation?
a back and forth. I mean, there was a few weeks before I actually moved out. It was like, do we try to make this work? Do we not?
Okay.
Uh, the initial was kind of like the end of a Sally Field movie, like Mrs. Doubtfire, where it's like the whole time, oh my God, like, it's just
How
like,
could I not
wait,
know? Yes. Yeah.
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 And but there was do we make this work? Do we not? Clearly, it's not going to work. Because, when you are, the complication with a marriage is that, and this is what I felt leading up to the several years before thinking, man, I don't know that I can keep moving on like this is you have these thoughts of it's not just my life I'm affecting, and it seems very selfish to make this statement. And yet it's actually selfish to try to keep everything together without giving everyone else the chance to be part of the decision. And I couldn't show up as the best father or the best spouse if I wasn't my full self and couldn't actually let people know who I was because I couldn't answer a question completely honestly without having to sit back and think, well, how is this going to impact the way they might view me or think of me instead of just saying, well, this is what I think.
Yeah,
And so, yeah, so that time leading up to it, when there's something in a marriage that shifts the dynamic of the relationship between the two people, those two people also have to consider how does this affect our kids? Can we each be okay alone, even financially? Like it's not a simple,
it's not. Yeah.
it's not a simple shift where we say, okay, I'm moving on because I don't accept this piece that you just added to the equation. It's okay, yes, I don't like that piece of the equation. However, how much do we want to disrupt the life of our kids? How much do we want to, can I even afford a place on my own? How does all of that look? And so that initial transition is very much figuring things out. And then you figure things out, and then you're out on your own going, man, why did I do that?
Yeah, it's a big disruption. That is definitely, regardless of the reason for disassembling, decoupling a family, is it's definitely part of the transition that shows up all the time. It also shows up in, it's really interesting. So in research, it shows up when people are widowed, um, but
Mhm.
that has a completely different social dynamic
Oh yeah.
than divorce. So there's like tons of
Hmm.
community support for widows in most cases.
Right.
And then, but in divorce, people always talk about feeling isolated and, alone. So for you though, I think you're going through like a get to know yourself as a result of this. So you've talked about how this is allowing you to live authentically. And it sounds like, you made this announcement, but you'd never had a chance to sort of live this as your identity. So you were getting to know yourself. Within the like sort of self-help coaching space, we use the word authenticity like so much. It's a real buzzword, right?
Hmm.
And yet I wanted to talk to you about it and give you a chance to talk about it because I think it can be confusing when you're in a situation where you have been disconnected from a part of your personality for whatever reason, or in your case, masking or repressing a piece of who you are, right? To even know what that authenticity is or what it would feel like or how to lean into it kind of thing. Like it's like, so I wanted to give you a chance to talk more about how that felt to be connecting with your authentic self as a part of this transition.
Oh, I appreciate that. It's interesting when we develop a set of coping mechanisms for our entire life, we don't realize how many things we're doing just, subconsciously and without even giving thought to it. I know that when I was in the closet, I would think about every step of the day. How am I going to dress? Because I don't want to look too stylish because that's going to look gay. What am I going to order for lunch if I go out with coworkers? I don't want to get a salad because that's going to look gay. And I know these are all stereotypes, but that's the danger of what we allow to live in our head. It's that every single decision, I would be afraid when people would ask like what my favorite music was. I wouldn't want to reply because I didn't know what the right answer was. I was always caught up with what the right answer was. And so when we start to make these changes, I had to actually start acknowledging that I was still struggling with showing up and being myself because I still had that innate urge to just step back and say, okay, but what's the right thing? And I was talking to a friend about a year after I came out, and I said something about, oh, well, that's going to make me look gay or they're going to know I'm gay. And he just said, he kind of laughed and he's like, but you are. And
Yes.
I was like, oh, you're right. Like it isn't a problem that I look that way because that's who I am. And it's not that the other thing is I don't want it's funny because yes, I signed up for this podcast to talk about this part of my life, but I also don't want it to be that people meet me and go, "Oh, that's gay Andy," or that's like I don't that doesn't need to be the full identity of who I am. And that was I think another fear is that being authentic and leaning into one part of our life doesn't mean it has to take over your entire life. There are
Right.
people who meet me who know me for a long time and don't even know that side of me, and it's not because I'm hiding it anymore, it's because no conversation came up where it was relevant.
Yeah.
We met as small business owners, or we met because they're the barista at my coffee shop and I go in there every day. And then one day they're like, "Oh, I didn't know that about you." And it's not a big deal. It's just, yeah, because I was giving you my coffee order, I was asking how your kids are. Like, so,
Right.
um,
Right. You
so I
don't
think
have
there's
to
this,
be like this part of your identity does not need to be the main focus of your
right.
of anything. Unless,
Yeah.
you know, unless it relates, and it is. No,
Hmm.
that I think that's
Yeah.
absolutely true. And I think that when I talk to people about transitions and specifically titles, right? Because anytime you go through a transition, if your title changes,
Right.
like, employee to retiree, um, you know,
Yeah.
female to mom or stepmom, right? Dad to,
Hmm.
husband to ex-husband, right? That's any of
Right.
those things. Sometimes there can be a lot of resistance to that new title. And the example you gave is exactly what I do. I'm like, you want to get to the point where, it's aligned enough. When I know that I'm aligned is when somebody comes up and they're like, "Oh, well, you're Amy." And I'm like, "Yes, I know." Like, it's not like, it's not like a challenge.
Hmm.
It's like,
Yeah.
and what?
And yeah, and where are we going with this? Yeah.
Yes, and when I
I,
was in my early 20s, I did a year of study abroad, and one of the people in the cohort was very focused on the fact that we needed to dress in this European fashion, or else people would know that we were Americans. And I remember she was a very
mm,
enthusiastic, delightful person. I tell this story all the time. And I remember that, like, after several days of this, I was like, I am American. They are going to know as soon as I open my mouth. Like, I'm not sure I
right.
fully understand why I'm supposed to be hiding this. Like, I'm not going to do a
Hmm.
good job of obscuring this, even if I dress perfectly. The minute I say one thing, they are going to
Right.
know.
I'm gonna open my mouth. They're gonna know.
They're going to know. And so for
Mhm.
me, while she really enjoyed that and she went on to do that, for me it was like I'm just going to embrace the fact that I am an American in this
Yeah.
spot, which I think that coming, and I think it's probably different for everybody, but I think that, like you said, you were looking for the type of authenticity where you were not having to spend a lot of time planning and worrying about how people would judge you based on how you showed up.
Yeah. And definitely, once I realized how much I was doing it, I think that awareness then helped me to think, okay, I don't need to stew on every decision, and I can pick and choose the important ones that require more thought. But
And when
it,
you
it
say that, does
it's
that mean
definitely
that
been some.
you were not aware? Like, because that's, people, that's
Yeah.
the other word, clarity, that we throw around all the time. But it's like when you're not aware you're
Hmm.
doing something, you're not aware you're unclear.
Right. Exactly. And I even just people would be like, "Where do you want to go for lunch?" And I'd be like, I really struggle answering that question. And now I'll say, pizza or Mexican or Chinese, I don't care. Or I'll say, hey, I've wanted to try this new place, but if you have something else in mind, great. Because honestly don't sometimes care.
Right.
But breaking down the difference between do I really not have a stake in the decision, or do I struggle to make a claim on what it is that I care about? And those are two different things. And I think breaking that apart so that I can have that clarity around, am I struggling to make a decision, or do I really not have any care in that process?
So when I hear you say that, I'm going to ask this follow-up question. Then was making decisions harder for you when you had all of this brain chatter in your mind? Like, did making good decisions become easier with authenticity in your life?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah,
Yes.
it
Um,
makes
I
sense.
could go on about that, but it's an easy yes, definitely.
Well, I think that that's helpful for people. I've heard that come up in many stories of people's lived experience, and it's one of the
Hmm.
reasons that I like to tell stories of, people's lived
Right.
experience, because, in a
Well,
textbook, it's like, just make a decision
right.
quickly. But, sometimes when we're struggling to make a decision, it might be helpful to be like, why is decision making, hard? And I don't know that we can always see that until we're through on the other side, to tell you the truth.
Right. And one thing that I've been able to look back and noticed is that when I was spending all day long thinking about how I was showing up and being preoccupied with that, I can't even put a guesstimate on is that was that 30% of my headspace? Was it 40%? Was it 60%? But it was a huge amount of my thoughts and headspace and being preoccupied with how I'm showing up. So that means that only leaves the rest for me to make a clear decision with. So I think I'm showing up 100% or 120% because it feels like I'm working so hard, and yet I really only have 60% effort or attention to devote.
That's a really good point. That's a really good point. All right. So, one of the questions that I ask people pretty frequently nowadays on this show is because people show up and they tell personal stories, right? Like you were saying, 98% of your life, probably this story is not relevant to, the actual exchange. When you go into Sweet Green to order a salad, they don't need to know.
Hmm.
They don't need to know.
Right.
So then the question is though, why is this a story that you want to share? Who do you hope hears it, and what is the benefit that you hope that people who are watching and listening get from hearing your story of making this change in your life?
I think the what it really comes down to for me is that we all have something we feel insecure, uncomfortable about. And if someone like I don't expect everyone to go, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna go come out of the closet tomorrow." Like I know that most of the world is not gay. I'm not out here to convert people to, my gay religion or anything. But it really is that I want to convert you to say, if I've been holding back on the fact that I love pineapple on pizza and I haven't wanted to voice that in the office because I know that there are pineapple pizza haters that I'm surrounded by, I'm going to be okay saying I like it and that's okay because that's going to open up the doors for me to not only repel the people that have that problem with me, but also attract the people who are going to support that part of my life.
Yes.
You could be sitting in a coffee shop and you see someone knitting, and, if we didn't have the courage to do that publicly in front of other people, that person is going to have some people say, "Oh my gosh, they got to take their yarn everywhere. I can't stand it. Yarn makes me feel itchy, whatever." But you're going to have even more people who come up to you and say, "Wow, what are you knitting? I just started knitting." And you're probably sitting there going, "I'm knitting because I'm an introvert. Please don't talk to me." But whatever the thing is, it's going to allow you to find the right support, and it's going to it just makes life easier because we stop wasting time with all the things that actually don't matter to us.
Yeah, the support pieces actually can be, used the example of like knitting in a social circle, which is good. But it's actually, I mean, it touches everything. So it's like if you live in a family or a dorm or a group house where everybody listens to country music and you don't tell people that you like alternative, they will
Hmm.
probably assume that you like country and you'll be uncomfortable and nobody even knows. Right,
Right.
nobody even knows,
Yeah.
and so they can't, they just assume you're along for the ride, and so you feel isolated and unsupported, and if you put that in, and there are some things like that are, one of the early interviews I did more than a decade ago, I interviewed a man who, has had dwarfism, um, and one of the things he pointed out is he can't hide his difference, and
Hmm.
he talked about how that, that had its benefits and its shortcomings, right? But so he can't
Right.
obscure it. He has to deal with the fact that people see it and can make that decision. And so it's in the face, people know. And but on the flip side, if it's something invisible and you don't tell people, they can't help you.
Right.
And they can't support you, so they can't give you directions, they can't nothing. They can't nothing.
Hmm.
And so
Right.
it fawns out on all those things. All right, so very good. So thank you for answering that. So today, I believe that you are a speaker and an author and a coach, and people can find you at awkwardcareer.com. Is that right?
Correct. Yes.
Awkwardcareer.com. You have a podcast, which is Own Your Awkward.
Hmm.
And so those are the things. And you have a free download that people in the audience can get from the show notes on the audio player or in YouTube called Discover Your Hidden Superpower. So all of that information is in those places, the show notes and on YouTube and those things like that. I always remind people the easiest way to get the links, especially for the free stuff, is to subscribe to the email community at imperfectadulting.com because then I zap it into your email box and you can click on it straight that way. It's very easy. You ready to wrap this up with my final random questions? They're no longer random actually, but all right, here we go. So,
All
if
right.
you can share something, right? Today, there's no shortage of information. We can find anything at our fingertips. We just speak our desires into the air and we begin to get served social media ads for the things that we don't want. But share with us, personal referrals are a great thing. Share with us something good that you like that you think other people would enjoy a referral. It could be a great movie, TV show, wonderful book, something that you've enjoyed that you think the audience would like?
Oh my gosh. I am again, see, I have such a hard time picking a favorite. It's one of those things I've realized, and I knew these the form of these questions were coming because I've enjoyed listening to your show. Um, lately I just took and this is just top of mind because a friend of mine is a neuroscientist, Melissa Hughes, and she created uh this cognitive blueprint assessment, and
Okay.
it's at Brain Power Rocks, and you can learn how your brain actually works in default. And I took this test and it was such an eye-opening thing because there were moments where I look back in my life and went, oh, that's why my brain works that way, or that's why I want to do this thing. So, but she does these neuro nuggets, and I've just been all over watching her stuff because every time I watch one, I'm enthralled. But it's Melissa Hughes. Take the cognitive blueprint. It's you don't even have to give her your email to get the result, and you don't have to
Oh.
pay to get the good results. So, because a lot of times we worry about that, like, what am I signing up for? Like,
Oh,
you can
yeah,
just go
and
in there and
where is
find
it
out.
going?
So,
Yes, exactly,
yeah,
right,
exactly,
exactly, all of the, like, fitness things, all of the things, it's like, now just 24.99 to get your custom plan. It was like, "That was not the ad. That was not the ad."
exactly. Yep.
Absolutely, that's okay, so Melissa Hughes, Brain Power Rocks, that's a wonderful suggestion, I appreciate that, and I love that you're learning that about you. Okay, this is a segment of the show that I am now calling unsupervised online
Oh,
shopping. What is something that you've purchased online for yourself that you are really pretty sure was pretty great and you think that everybody should know about it?
okay. So I'm just a geek about doing all my business stuff, and I don't do a lot of online shopping, but when I do, it's usually for my business. But the latest thing that I bought was the little microphone that you plug into your phone
Oh,
so you
yeah.
can record. And it just makes a difference because I can have my phone across the trail and I can be coming out of the bushes and you can still hear me. It's kind of creepy because my voice should be further away from the camera. But I'm all about, when you make your business your life, there's such a line, as I'm sure you know. It's like, oh, this is what I do. Uh, I guess something more fun was I did get some foldable kayaks a couple years ago.
Oh,
Those
those are
those were more
those
fun.
look.
That's what I should have led with, was the foldable kayaks.
No,
Uh,
I think that the camera mics, the phone mics. I mean, I have one of those too. So do you do some like you do when you're out hiking? You do like videos and you set your phone
yeah,
up
I'll
and you're
do
further away.
quirky little reels or thoughts in
Yeah.
time, any little whatever random thought pops into my head. I'll make a video and put it out there. Some of them are funny, some are entertaining, some are really inspirational, and some are like, why did you even make that?
So I mean, I have one of those too, and I love it. I don't use it as much as I could. And then I bizarrely, because I'm old, I have like a pet peeve, which is like, I don't like it when people hold those little microphones in
Oh,
their finger.
the same way. Or
I'm
put it
like,
on a pencil.
I actually, that I don't mind. Like the guys who are there, they
Okay.
clip it onto like a spatula. I'm like, that I get. I totally get. But the ones where they're holding it right here or they're doing an interview and they're passing it back and forth for some reason that
Mhm.
drives me bananas. It doesn't bother most people and it's not a thing that I should spend any of my time worrying about, but it totally is. All right. So that is foldable kayaks though. Very cool. Very, very cool. That's it, Andy Vargo. Thank you so much for being a wonderful guest today on the show.
Amy, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the show. Before I go, I want to encourage you to become a bigger part of the conversation. Please subscribe wherever you're listening or watching the show. That helps my stats. A request from the bottom of my indie creator heart is to please tell your friends about the show. That is the real way new people discover it. If you feel motivated, I would love it if you rated the show or wrote a review on whatever platform you are using. Please be sure to head over to imperfectadulting.com and sign up for the email community. I call this the Village. You'll get some free stuff right away, and you'll begin to get the weekly emails that I send. This includes the links for special offers from any guests on the show and cool stuff I put together for the community. There's a lot more going on than just this show, and the only way to find out is to get the emails. Plus, you're busy, you don't have time or desire to follow every single tidbit on social media, and you don't have to because I'm happy to send it to you. If you have a story you'd like to share with the audience, I have an open application for guests. Guess where you'll find it? That's right, on the website and in the emails. And that's a wrap for this episode. Until next time, remember that the journey is the destination. Ralph Waldo Emerson said that, not me. Well, until just now. I did just say it. But what I want you to hear today is that if your adulting journey isn't going the way you expected, that just may not mean you're lost. It may mean that you're just on your way. And now, the fine print. The Art of Imperfect Adulting podcast and streaming video show is a copyrighted work created and produced by Amy Stone and Amy Says So. The music was written and produced by Todd Thompson at Dharma Bomb Studios. All rights are reserved. Anything expressed on this show is offered as entertainment, and the views of the guests may not always represent the ideas and viewpoints of the host. That's me. Amy Stone does not intend to hold herself out to provide professional advice or recommendations of any kind. In the end, you and you alone need to make those kinds of decisions based on your personal and individual situation, needs, circumstances, and comfort level. Yeah, it's a little weird for me to talk about myself in the third person, but you get the idea. This is Amy Stone, signing off.